Hello and welcome to Dialogue. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is paying a visit to the United States, perhaps for the last time during her term of office. This follows U.S. President Joe Biden's trip to NATO Summit last month. So what has come out of Merkel's finale in the United States? Has President Joe Biden brought the European allies closer together so far? Today I'm glad to be joined by Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies, and from Moscow by Pavel Falkenhauer, Defense Analyst. Also, we have Peter Kuznick, Professor of History from American University in Washington, D.C. Welcome, gentlemen. That's our topic. I'm Wang Guan. Professor Kuznick, let me go to you in Washington, D.C., where the visit took place. The atmosphere looked cordial. There was an exchange of nice words between Biden and Merkel. There was this Washington declaration where they emphasized common values on climate change, on human rights, on democratic principles, but also they differed on China and Russia. How do you look at this visit? What do you think has been achieved?
I think this was Angela Merkel's opportunity to visit Washington for one last time as Chancellor. Biden's whole thrust has been to rebuild the alliance with his United States European allies. After 4 years of Donald Trump destroying the alliance, actually downplaying NATO, criticizing NATO, criticizing United States European allies, Biden has come in trying to rebuild those alliances. The relationship between the United States and Germany is central to the relationship between the United States and the rest of the EU. But we don't agree on everything. The United States and Germany are very strongly opposed when it comes to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which the United States has been trying to get Germany to disavow and to stop before it's completed. It's about 90% completed now. The United States has said that this is a security threat, not only to the Ukrainians and the Europeans, but also to the United States. And the United States has been trying to get the Europeans to ally against Russia and China. The Europeans have been much more hesitant. They don't want to be put in that position. Maybe the Brits are happy to do so, but Germany and France have resisted that kind of polarization, that kind of bifurcation. They want to work with China, and in fact, China is their main trading partner. So Germany has more economic ties to China than it does to the United States at this point. They don't want to see that disrupted. They also don't like the U.S. hardline approach, seeing this as a kind of new Cold War. They've been trying to stop that. And so there was no resolving those differences during Merkel's visit. It was a friendly visit. We reaffirmed our close relationship, but the issues that divide us then still divide us today.
Right. Professor Cui Hongjian, how do you look at this visit?
Even now, most of the observers regarded this visit by Chancellor Merkel as a farewell diplomacy. But I think still, Chancellor Merkel tried to have some more foreign policy legacy for her maybe new government after this September. And also, I think that Chancellor Merkel is still trying to get some efforts to deal with some difficult issues with the United States. Just like we find that how about this discussion on Nord Stream 2 and also these trade issues between Germany and the United States. But also we can find out maybe from an American side, even this time, President Biden gave a very high level, treatment to Chancellor Merkel. But still, I think that the United States not yet ready to get some more compromise with some difficult issues with Germany. Especially we look at what happened for Nord Stream 2 and some other. Mm-hmm. But of course, regarding to some commonalities we can find from both sides, they still try to have some more political words about the so-called value and human rights and some others. And also they agree with more coordination on policies towards China and Russia. But still, I think that now a very interesting situation for Germany-U.S. relations and also Europe-U.S. relations is, at the one hand, they do have some more and more coordinated attitude, but they do have some even maybe small divergences, but it's obvious difference on China and Russia, especially if we look at the words from Chancellor Merkel about China. You can find out Germany and most of the European countries still they put the cooperation ahead of competition when they are trying to decide the policy towards China. But regarding to the American, I think still a little bit disappointed with this attitude or messages from Chancellor Merkel by this visit, and also for most of the European countries for a long time.
Yeah, we talk about the divergent interests, perhaps between the Europeans and the Americans regarding China. But let's talk about this gas pipeline that runs through from Russia through Central and Eastern Europe to Germany. Pavel, Joe Biden said, Chancellor Merkel and I are absolutely united in our conversation that Russia must not be allowed to use energy as a weapon to coerce or threaten its neighbors. But Angela Merkel said we've come to different assessments as to what this project entails. Is there a disconnect here?
Merkel has been, and the German government has been for a long time emphasizing that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline going through under the Baltic Sea from Russia directly to Germany, it's just a technicality. That Germany and other European consumers consume Russian natural gas, and it doesn't really much matter by which particular pipe it's going to get to the consumer. The American interpretation and what the Ukrainians, Kiev is saying, and some supported by Poland and some other Eastern European, Central European nations, is that this is a political project, that Russia may use this pipeline for political ends. Of course, Moscow says that that's totally wrong, that this is just commercial. It just simply means that gas is going to get to Germany cheaper than otherwise. And so they didn't agree on that, but they agreed that if in the future Russia may begin sort of using this pipeline for political means, then Germany is going to do something. Then Merkel said that there can be additional sanctions slapped on Russia through the European Union. So that's what they agreed on.
All right, let's talk about China. On China, Angela Merkel said, you know, we've talked about the many facets of cooperation and competition with China, be it in the economic area, on security, on climate change. But Angela Merkel also said that trade with China needs to rest on the assumption that we have a level playing field, and how to deal with China, Angela Merkel said, ought to rest on the shared values, meaning the values between the Europeans and the United States. Professor Kuznick, is Angela Merkel largely addressing an American and European audience at this point?
I think she is, and addressing the American audience especially. She's trying to smooth over some of the differences. The United States, beginning under Trump, has been very aggressively hostile to China. U.S. security policy, beginning in 2018, said international terrorism is not the main threat to the United States, it's Russia and China. The U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon, in its recent budget requests, says repeatedly the main threat to the United States is China. So beginning under Trump, but Biden has doubled down on this policy of confrontation with China. He put Jake Sullivan in there. He put Kurt Campbell as the main advisor when it comes to China policy, and Campbell has been very aggressively critical of China. He was the brains behind the Asia pivot. Hillary Clinton might have articulated it back in 2011, but it was really Campbell's policy. And so now when the United States is pulling out of Afghanistan, big part of that is so the United States can focus more on the competition, the confrontation with China. So we're redeploying our assets into the Pacific to be in better position to challenge China. So given that context, Merkel has got to say certain things that seem to agree with the United States emphasis on China. But in reality, Merkel is trying to avoid that kind of policy. She does not want to see a new Cold War. She does not want to see a military confrontation. She wants to work with China and thinks that by working together, we've got more in common than we have dividing us. But there are big differences over human rights. There's big differences over Hong Kong, big differences over the Uyghurs, big differences over the South China Sea. And those are not going away. But the question is, can they be resolved in a friendly way, or is this going to lead to confrontation? And the situation in Taiwan is probably the most troubling of all. And the possibility of military confrontation, even war over Taiwan at this point, has got many people in all countries very, very worried right now.
I think if those who have forgotten about the Cold War and the damages it has done, they should go to the bookstore and pick up the book you wrote on the untold history of the United States. Professor Cui Hongjian, let me go to you. I mean, what do you think? What is best for Germany when it comes to dealing with China?
Undoubtedly, when Germany to deal with the issue towards its policy towards China, I think firstly a very, very big common interest in economic cooperation, and also even some other bigger space for, as we know, the green economy and the digital economy. Everything will be in the mind. But of course, now I think that for Germany, it still need to take more consideration about its political environment, not only within Germany and Europe, and especially the pressure from the United States. But of course, I think no matter which kind of environment, still Germany is trying to define and host its position. I think that you can find out it agree with the United States in principle when they deal with the China issue. But at the same time, I think Germany also tried to deliver a message to Washington that they should be different in practice, because as we know, they do have different strategic goals towards China, because there is not so much, worrying or suspicion about the so-called hegemony war and some other issue. I think for Germany, the main problem or main issue still for European integration, or even some, regional issue in North Africa or some other. So for Germany and most European countries, China still certainly a partner and a very necessary partner for economy or some other. But maybe just, if you try to regard China as a threat, but this threat is far away, and it's indirect for most of European countries, including Germany.
Yeah, Pavel, do you think Joe Biden's strategy of pressuring, even cornering its allies and partners into choosing and picking between China or the U.S. will work?
Well, I say it's rather working. Even in Europe, though Europeans don't really see China as a real threat, of course, may be more effective in the Pacific region, but even in Europe it works. Biden has returned America to Europe, to NATO. The Europeans are very, very glad that that has happened, and they cherish the change in American policy, and so they're ready, at least to some extent, to go along with the present American fixation on China, though for their Europeans it's not that much of an issue, but having America back and America backing NATO and America backing Europe militarily is more important. So at least on the verbal side, that's going to happen. On the military side, less so, but anyway, now we see a British aircraft carrier on its maiden voyage going to the seas around China, demonstrating that not only the Americans or the Japanese, but also European military fleets can appear there in the Far East to support the United States as an ally. So there is this demonstrative move by the Europeans to go their part of the way to reconcile with the new American government. Of course, kind of pretending that Donald Trump was just some kind of freak and anomaly, but of course he was not. He represents a large section of American society that's more nationalistic and more isolationist, and so the present American policy is this. The next American administration may again begin to turn away against Europe, and the Europeans are very afraid that may happen.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in 2024. Stay with us, gentlemen. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about China-Russia relations and a treaty the two sides signed 20 years ago. Welcome back. 20 years ago, leaders of China and Russia put their signatures on the historic Treaty of Good-Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. Over the past 2 decades, governments of the two sides have emphasized time and time again the importance of good neighborly relations. To talk about that, let me turn to Director Cui Hongjian first. Director Cui, how do you look at this piece of treaty and how that has helped China-Russia relations to advance in the past 20 years?
I think it's a very good and important time to get some experience from China-Russia relations, especially from a very special date, 20th anniversary for this treaty. I think if we look at the history, I think the very biggest, a very big contribution of the treaty and also China-Russia relations to themselves and also to the international community is how to deal with the two big countries, especially when they are neighbors. I think it will give a very, very big experience for other countries and regions. Also, we know that in the past 20 years, if we look at the situation when both two countries signed the treaty, it's just shortly after the end of the Cold War. And at that time, China and Russia, they tried to provide a stable environment, not only for bilateral relations and also for this region, especially Euro-Asia continent. And so, as we know that once there is a treaty and higher mutual trust, so it gives a lot of space for both countries to design and implement their strategies for economic cooperation, energy cooperation, and the people-to-people contact, everything. So I think not only by this treaty and the cooperation between two countries contribute to the stability for this region, and also it gives a very, very significance as a moat to the international community, especially nowadays in the background of looks like the strengthening of a competition between big powers.
Definitely, there has been a resurgence of nationalist rhetorics and geopoliticking over the past years. Pavel, how was this piece of treaty and China-Russia relations at large be looked at in Moscow?
Well, it's seen increasingly as a very, very important relationship. Right now, today speaking in Tashkent, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, after meeting his Chinese counterpart, has said that this relationship, this cooperation between Moscow and Beijing is even more than a Cold War military political alliance. It's even deeper than that. So he was very upbeat, and that reflects the mood in the Kremlin, in the Russian leadership, that this is highly important, as Russia is increasingly a hostile relationship with America and its allies, and China has its own problem with America and its allies. Russia and China are working more and more together, though it's not, of course, an alliance, but anyway, it's a very, very close political and economic cooperation.
Peter, how do you think this episode of China-Russia relations in the past 10, 20 years will be written by historians like yourself? Because it has been a complex relationship. When you think about the Sino-Soviet split, when you think about the fall of USSR, and then the new relations in the 21st century.
Well, I think historians are going to put it in the context of what's happened in the world in the past 20 years, beginning with the invasion, or 9/11, followed by the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, the Russian intervention into Ukraine following the coup in Ukraine, the seizing of Crimea, in the context of Russia's reemergence as a tremendous military force in the world, and China's development, China's phenomenal economic growth during this period. So we're going to see the biggest country in the world, Russia, the most populous country in the world, China, coming into an alliance largely against the United States. So it's the U.S. push for hegemony over this 20-year period that's been targeting both Russia and China in certain ways and almost forcing them into bed with each other. There were a lot of disagreements between Russia and China, very strong enmity during certain periods, but over the past 20 years, they've grown closer and closer. Xi Jinping refers to Vladimir Putin as his best friend, his closest ally internationally. Putin has reciprocated. And so even though it's not a formal military alliance at this point, it's a very, very close counter-hegemonic coalition against the United States and its allies. So we're seeing a world now which is a very dangerous world, and a world also during this time that we've seen not only the strengthening and the improvement of nuclear capabilities, but also the terrible climate crisis. So we see a planet that's threatened, existential threats, while we're focusing on these military and political and sometimes human rights differences among us. So the question is, will our common humanity overcome our different ideologies and political systems and military alliances? You know, what is the future of the planet? What historians are going to be looking at.
Right. Director Cui, other than the counter-hegemonic coalition specified by Peter, what are some of the other aspects of China-Russia relations? Are there indigenous drivers of China-Russia cooperation in terms of economic relations, trade, and investment?
I think, yes, regarding to the indigenous dynamic for China-Russia relations, yes, I think that geographic positions certainly should be a very important dynamic, because for both two neighboring countries, it's very necessary to deal with, to get along well with each other. Secondly, yes, energy cooperation give a lot of benefits for both two sides. And also third, how about economic investment and even in the future, the digital economy cooperation? And I think it will give a lot of space for China-Russia cooperation. As we know, yes, China now is developing the big economy, and also China have a lot of the cooperation areas of its neighboring countries. If we look at the bilateral trade, recent years, the bilateral trade between China and Russia increased nearly 20% year by year. So I think it gives a very big scenarios, a very good scenario for this cooperation, not only in some security, regional, and military energy. I think the more constructive and healthy economic cooperation will give a sustainable basis for China-Russia relations.
Pavel, Vladimir Putin repeatedly said that China-Russia relations, in his opinion, is at the best level historically. What do you think he means by that?
Oh, he means that Russia and China are together. Russia and China are partners in politics. Russia and China have the same interests and the same in many areas, and are working very closely together diplomatically, politically, economically, and actually militarily, though the relationship is yet rather light for a more or less union of nations, but most likely that's a field that's going to be expanded in the coming years.
Peter, we have about 1 minute left. Talking about the future of global order and geopoliticking, where do you see China-Russia-U.S. relations headed in the foreseeable future?
Well, I'm not very optimistic, unfortunately. The Biden administration seems to be doubling down on some of the policies of the Trump administration. I think Biden is doing a tremendous job domestically in the United States here on the home front, but in terms of foreign policy, it's the same kind of foreign policy establishment thinking that's seeing the world in polarized, good guys, bad guys, black, white, us, them kind of terms right now. So I'm not optimistic about improvement. The summit that Biden had with Putin was a small step in the right direction. I hope Biden does meet with Xi Jinping in the near future. But the differences between us are pretty serious right now. We're not going to agree upon human rights. We're not going to agree upon some of the fundamentals, but we should pull back on the hotspots, on Ukraine, on Taiwan. These are the areas that could lead to military confrontation. And once a confrontation like that starts, it's very, very hard to control it. So both sides are building up militarily. The world is wasting so much of its resources on military expenditures right now that doesn't make any sense given the common interest. We've got to be working together on climate change. We've got to be working together on arms control, on dealing with the pandemic, on global poverty issues. There's a lot that should be uniting us that right now seems to be subsumed to the things that are dividing us. So I'm not very optimistic, but I'm certainly not giving up hope right now.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on Dialogue tonight. Thank you all very much. And thank you for watching Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.